Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of God is Not a Theory with Ken Fish. I'm your host, Grant Pemberton, and on today's episode, we have the incredible honor of a special guest, Ken Fish, and me, I guess, if that counts. And we're going to be talking about the Ignition Conference that just wrapped up 2 days ago. At this point of this recording, technically one day ago, if you count the holdover at Franklin Vineyard. So Ken has made it back home. I am back home, and I told Ken I just woke up from a nap, but he has not taken a nap yet. So, Ken, thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
You look better than I do, and more awake and together. So, congratulations on that. You
it's
know,
probably because I shaved, unlike you, and I've had a shower.
two things. I hear those are good things to do.
They are good things to
Yeah,
do. I also slept in my own bed last night, though, so that was pretty good.
makes a big difference. Makes a big difference. Well, Ken, I am still reeling. We actually had a kind of an informal debriefing session. Sarah, my wife, and I, and Catherine, who was the other worship leader, worship pastor, and her husband, who was there the whole time. We got together last night and just sort of debriefed the conference and what we all experienced. And so I'll tell you, from our end, it was pretty amazing. I mean, I've heard nothing but incredible things and testimonies and all of that. I'm not sure what you've been hearing.
Yeah, I haven't heard any negative feedback yet. I'm sure somebody will have something they want to say, but it's been overwhelmingly positive. So I personally thought this conference was better than Fusion was last year, but I couldn't tell you exactly why, because I thought Fusion was great. I really have nothing negative to say about Fusion. So, if Fusion was an A, maybe this was an A plus, or if Fusion was an A plus, then this is an A plus plus. It's not a big difference, but again, I can't exactly tell you why I thought this was better. I just did. Maybe it's because Beth and I got a personal word about our granddaughter. That was pretty amazing. When Jeremy, he was standing right in front of us, and Jeremy and I are friends, but I haven't spoken with him about the issues with Selah and her situation with the distressed birth. And I know he doesn't read any of our, prayer letters or anything like that, because he's not even on the list to receive that. So I suppose a skeptic could say, well, he just said that, in order to, look cool and somehow bless you guys. There is this meme, and I'm aware of it, that, prophets always call out those who organize the meetings and send them honoraria. But you would really work hard to convince me that that was going on with Jeremy. I'll just say that, because I don't think he functions that way. And he would have had in the natural, I suppose he could have known, but I am certain that he did not know.
Yeah.
But anyway, he gave this word about either parents or grandparents who had a child or a grandchild who had a problem here on the head, and he touched the right side of the head. And those who read our prayer letter, I put in the most recent one that just came out about a week ago, that Selah had a distressed birth, and the doctors have confirmed through MRI that there is some brain damage. They don't know exactly how severe it is, and some of it they probably won't be able to say until she starts, moving to key milestones like feeding herself, starting to walk, and learning to talk, because the zones that are affected govern those functions. So, it may be that there'll be a long-term problem, but I don't think so, especially not after that word. But I also don't think so, because I believe God's a healing God. And I also know that children are the modern term that everyone uses is neuroplastic. And she could end up, we could say in a secular sense, recovering, or we might say in a more spiritual sense, God may heal her, but wouldn't lose her job. But anyway, Jeremy had this word about a child with a problem on the right side of the head. And I haven't gone back and listened to the word yet, so I don't remember. He may have said it happened in birth, but in any case, he gave this word. And Beth and I were sitting directly in front of him, and nobody responded. And so we said, well, our granddaughter, I mean, it is a grandchild. And so he prayed over her, he prayed over us. And, we're very encouraged. We expect that this is going to result in a miraculous healing for Selah, and her brain will be normal. I can't prove that right now. And it'll probably be months until we have certain confirmation, but there will be periodic MRIs done on her to track what's going on with her brain. So who knows, maybe with the next MRI, they'll see no zones of deadness and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
I'll keep you informed as that unfolds. Anyway, for me, that wasn't the only highlight of the conference, and I don't want to make it all about me or my family, but I thought that was pretty cool. I'll just say that.
Absolutely. No, it is nice when, because when you're working, because I mean, for us that are putting on the conference, it's work. And it is kind of nice to get something for the Lord to sort of say, hey, here's a little tip for you.
Let me throw you a bone.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think that was a pretty awesome moment. And I'm sure you could say more, but just again, to vouch for Jeremy, I mean, I've gotten to spend enough time with the guy to know that he is the real deal. And, and is totally fine to fail at a prophecy and just to be like, well, okay, I'll move on, so he's not one to gen anything up. I haven't seen that at all. He's a great guy. No, it was amazing. There were so many, so many prophetic words. And you're right. It was, your wife and I were talking on the last day of the conference for a long time about this one was so different than last year's conference.
Mm-hmm.
And we've said, actually, both of us I'm not sure which one we like better. But because we loved them both so much, but it was just remarkably different feel. It was just as much of like power encounters. And I think we actually got to ministry time a lot quicker. We kind of broke through that thing this year, honestly. Like we moved pretty quick into some pretty explosive ministry time. Last year, it seemed to take a little bit longer to get that uptick. You know what I mean? And so this year it was like primed, as soon as we sort of went there, it started happening pretty quickly. Would you agree with that? I felt like last year's conference, it took a minute, maybe a couple days to really break through what I don't know, but to actually start seeing it. And I know that specifically because we talk about it here quite a bit, where we were ministering last year and it finally started breaking out. And I'll never forget the way that you said it, because I think we were all waiting for it. And so my wife and I will say it quite a bit now, but you just were like, it's happening. And then it just started happening. So we will say that quite a bit now. It's like, it's happening. And, but I remember that moment. It took a minute, but this year, man, it really, I don't know if it was a hunger or expectation, or if, I don't know what it was, but it seemed like we got there a lot quicker this year.
That was one of the kind of takeaways from the conference too, was this acronym HEF. When Jeremy brought it up, he said expectation, hunger, faith. But in the green room afterward, I said, I think it's actually hunger, expectation, faith. Because the first thing you do is you get hungry. And then, think about, you could change the word expectation to anticipation. And I think of Carly Simon's old songs, actually before your time, Grant, but anticipation, it's making me wait. It's keeping me waiting. I won't sing, but anyway, that was what she said. And so I think what happens is we get hungry for God to do something. And then out of that, we began anticipating, which is a form of expectation. And then faith grabs a hold of it and it all just sort of goes off. One thing that was different about this year, and I know it was different because I wrote the run sheet, is we had feedback from the crowd last year that they wanted more ministry time. So I built ministry time in early on. Now, the first morning and afternoon, we didn't have it because I was trying to get a bunch of our speakers out there and get what they said, on the stage, in the air, get people thinking in that direction. But by Thursday night, our first night, we had a ministry time and it really took off. And then every single session after that, we had ministry at each and every session. It was different session to session. It was not all the team or the crowd was praying for each other. Some of it was prophetic ministry, call out from the stage. There were several words given, over the crowd about specific healings and things like that. But we were trying to leave room for even more ministry than we had last year, and it seems to have worked. And I'm super excited that next year we're going to get Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, because in 4 days we're really going to have room to maneuver, and we haven't had that up until now. And last year, of course, we had that very awkward situation of moving between two buildings. But this year coming, it's going to be all in one place. I'll just take this moment here gratuitously and unashamedly to tell people that when we open registration, you really need to have an itchy finger and buy immediately, because I do not think that there will be sufficient seats next year. I think we will sell out, and many people who want to be there in person will not be able to.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. A couple of reasons why that's happening. We had a lot of local leaders show up to this thing this year and get incredibly touched. And these
Yep.
are leaders of large congregations.
Yep.
And they've still been texting me. I didn't even tell you this. Some of them are FaceTiming me. They all wanted to come to my church. These are pastors. They were like, "Oh man, I wish I could figure out how to come to your church on Sunday to keep going," because they got rocked. And so because of that, we think we're going to have a tremendous amount more local involvement of people. And, the room was already, what do you think?
Roughly 3/4 full.
Yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah. When that happens, there's probably a pretty good chance that it's gonna sell out. So, speaking of which, so this is a big deal, because last year we weren't even convinced, or you weren't, I was, but convinced that you're supposed to do it again, and so we weren't sure, and so we announced it a little bit later, and we also weren't really sure of a venue, but we have dates now. We're doing this thing. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, the dates next year will be Wednesday, the 8th of October through Saturday, the 11th of October. But we've also been offered the building for a Sunday night meeting. And it just happened yesterday that we came home. So just understand that what we're doing is we're processing in real time, and none of this is locked in, other than the dates that I've just given you. Those are locked in.
Well, I think the dates and the location.
Yeah, the dates and location are locked in. But we will probably do that Sunday night meeting on Sunday night for anyone who wants to come. Pastor James, who is the leader of that congregation at Bethel World Outreach. He seems to be incredibly excited. He sent me a text, and I think he's going to be one of our speakers next year based on the text that he sent me. So I'm ultra excited about that. You guys that are listening to this, you don't know James. He's from a totally different stream of the river from what we are. But trust me, this guy is, I told you that Melissa Shalhoub was going to be loaded for bear, and she's unbelievable. James is equally unbelievable, albeit a different kind of a person. And I think one of the things that was going on in our dynamic this year is we had very different kinds of people, kind of like last year, but maybe even more diverse, because R.T. Kendall, although he's friendly to the Spirit and he's pastored prophets, he doesn't really view himself as a prophet. He views himself as a teacher. And, he's far enough along in life that he's not afraid to express his own attitudes and ideas about things. And I thought it was quite respectful. I had no issues at all with anything that went on there in terms of the dialogue, or even where it seemed that maybe there was some disagreement. I had no problems with it whatsoever. I thanked RT profusely, and I sent him a written thank you last night. So I want to be clear about that. But he asked a few questions that, kind of people were like, whoa, wait a minute, where'd that come from? But I appreciated his incredible word-centered focus, and I view him as a solid brother in the Lord, and I'm happy to be walking shoulder to shoulder with him in this effort. So James would be a very different kind of person from RT or from Melissa or from Stacy, and I'm just very excited that he's going to be involved in all this. And with that, probably a bunch of his church will be involved. And that's another reason that this will probably sell out. So again, when we open the registration, I'm just warning you guys now, we're not going to open it for a while, so you don't need to worry. And we'll give you some advance notice, but you don't want to dilly dally, because this thing's going to sell. And if you want to be there in person, and believe me, you do want to be there in person. We did an online impartation, but you know who got all the prophetic words that were given by, Melissa, Stacy, Jeremy? I gave a few. They were people in the room. No, nobody on the stream got those words, because it's just sometimes you're aware of them, or sometimes you do get words for people on the stream, but more commonly it's people that are in the room. And similarly with the healing anointing, the deliverance anointing, man, that was another thing. This wasn't on my mind, but I just got to pause here. Melissa gave a word about mothers and daughters, and all these and she thought it was one mother and daughter, but all these mother-daughter pairs, and in some cases it was 2 or 3 daughters, came up with their moms, and man, the Holy Spirit hit like the proverbial truck bomb, and deliverance broke out, and people were on the floor. I mean, they were gacking and vomiting and screaming, but it was all going on. And afterward, I talked to several people, and they said, my entire life changed with that altar call for mothers and daughters. And I don't think Melissa even knew what she was going to do with all those people. The Holy Spirit just exploded over the entire line. And I mean, it was off the chain, as they say in Australia.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, even as you bring that up, I think, and we didn't talk about this beforehand, but I think there was a significant thing going on at this conference in regards to honoring women.
Yeah.
We had one of the best discussions I've ever seen on the validity of and biblical of validity of women in ministry between Dr. Keener, and RT Kendall, and it was incredibly respectful, incredibly intelligent, incredibly affirming, and everybody got to the conclusion of course, it's biblical that women are in ministry, and then we really demonstrated it. And and then also with the mothers and daughters thing that happened there, I thought there was a lot to unpack there, honestly, Ken, of even from a fathering standpoint, of how this was working with the mothers and daughters. And anyway, I think that was a really significant thing that came from this conference that I personally wasn't expecting. It was all female worship leaders, and you know what I mean? We really did, I think, a great job. Maybe even despite our own efforts, I don't think we were planning to.
Yeah. I mean, I have no problem with it, and in a few cases, I was trying to put women in front, but for sure, some of what happened, I didn't actually plan. Like it only occurred to me in our last impartation session that I was on the stage with 4 women, one of whom was my wife.
That's right.
That was our impartation leaders, and nothing against the men at all. It just, oh yeah, right. And man, that impartation time, off it went. So I agree with you. It was very affirming of women, and I think a lot of women who came felt, maybe, I don't know what to say, released or empowered or approved. I'll say sanctioned, but let's just understand, sanctioned gets used improperly in a lot of settings. Sanctioned has at its root sanctus, or holy. So when something is sanctioned, what it really should mean, although it's often not used this way, it's often used exactly the opposite way. Sanctioned means it's blessed, or it's under the blessing of God. It's under the Holy Spirit. Anyway, so I thought that was a tremendous thing that went on there.
Yeah, it was incredible. I didn't even think about the stage at the end. Yeah, it was all the ministers that were giving the impartation was led by women, and it was just man, it was a really great time. We need more of that. So yeah.
So one other thing that happened that I'll mention is RT Kendall said he really struggled with what he was going to do for his second message. And he, in the end, opted to teach on forgiveness. And by the way, he has a book on forgiveness, which everyone on this podcast should buy, because you really can't do enough with forgiveness. And if you want a second book that's really good, my friend Rodney Hogue wrote a very short little book on forgiveness that is also very good, Hogue. But Rodney wasn't a speaker, just to be clear. So anyway, RT Kendall's book on forgiveness is amazing. So he preached this message, and then he had a time where he wanted people to stand up and make a commitment to forgive whoever it was they had never forgiven. It was interesting. As he was doing that, I just had a sense that people were being healed in their bodies. So I walked up to him and I said, ask who's got healing in their neck, their shoulder, their hips. And I don't know exactly how many hands went up, but there were quite a few people in the room who were healed, and they were, were waving their hands and saying, yes, I got healed just by releasing forgiveness toward these people. And of course, much of that would have been arthritis, but maybe not all of it. And I have somebody that I'm very close with. I won't say who it is, but I have a friend with whom I'm very close. And she has been in a very difficult situation with a family member for a while. And it's really blown their family up in all the bad ways. And she's been trying to work her way through that in a charitable and Christian way, although I think the dynamics of it have made that at times very difficult. She stood up and prayed with RT to forgive and release this individual. Now, I did not know who she had stood up for, but I did see her stand up. Anyway, the next day I get a text from her, and she says, "You're not going to believe this. I came home and there was a note on my bed. And this individual in my family with whom I've had this conflict had written a note to me, handwritten, and it said, 'Life is too short. Can we let bygones be bygones?'"
Wow.
And then he'd signed it, dated it, and timestamped it. And when he dropped that note was only moments after she had stood to pray that prayer with R.T. Kendall. Now, when you're getting into relational healing, we don't tend to talk about that one as much. I teach on it in the Intermediate Healing series. But when we're getting into relational healing and not just physical healing, now we are truly talking about integrated healing, the whole man, the whole system,
Mm-hmm.
the whole woman, the whole system, the family, society.
Right.
What would happen if we could get this to go on in society? Wow.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Great.
I had a friend there that came, and just as we're sort of sharing testimonies from this, two metal shoulders, right? Couldn't lift up above, like, I guess this. I don't know. I didn't even know he had this. And during the worship, there was a moment. I'm not sure when it was. It might have been when I was leading my session or whatever. But he was able to raise his hands above his head for the first time ever. And so I don't know if that means that it dissolved or if he just got mobility or whatever. He will check. I know that he will go get an X-ray and actually figure that out. But what an incredible, I just found out about that today.
Praise God.
Yeah.
So crazy. I also want to talk for a minute about Avner Bosk. He left Israel to come over and speak for us. I communicated with him today. He's safely back in Israel. He told me that the Houthis fired a cruise missile at the airport in Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion Airport, while he was sitting on the tarmac waiting to take off to come to ignition.
Wow.
Israeli aerial defense system shot it down. And I doubt it was targeted at his specific plane. But it's a little weird to think that one of our speakers was, in the crosshairs of a cruise missile.
Right.
Anyway, Avner did an unbelievably good job articulating why replacement theology is not only anti-Semitic, it's racist.
Mm.
And he talked about why we need to reformat that entire branch of theological thinking, which emerged very early on in the ancient church, as early as the 2nd century. And he documented various places where church writers and fathers had articulated anti-Semitic views. He pointed out that, among other people, Martin Luther, yes, that Martin Luther, was anti-Semitic. And he pointed out that in the Third Lateran Council in 1215, the Roman Catholic Church made it illegal for Gentiles to marry Jews and for them to do any trading or any business with Jews, essentially trying to reduce them to second-class status. So there's a long history of anti-Semitism within the church, both ancient, maybe medieval, we could say, and even modern. And he showed why those who say that the Israel of God is the church, it's a mischaracterization of that passage. And he showed why so much of the church gets it wrong on Israel. And if you get it wrong on Israel and you don't understand that the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still in force, and that God is still a covenant-keeping God, you will also miss having a sustainable move of God. And I personally really believe, it's part of why I had Abner come in, I believe this is part of why so many of these outpourings and things sort of go so far and then they fizzle out. So I was immensely grateful to Abner for doing this. He left his family to come over, and while he was with us, his 7th grandchild was born. His wife was there, but he wasn't, because he was there serving us. And so I want to give a shout out to Abner. Do you want to say anything about what really struck you about Abner's talks?
And it was all incredible. I can't wait to get to recording, because they were so meaty. I mean, it was just so much
Dense.
theology and history and information. It was just like, again, I think we settled some issues at this conference in a way that I have never really heard. The importance of Israel being one of them. And Abner, oh my gosh, he's such a great guy. Like, my favorite thing was just hanging out with him. And we had dinner together, and it was just it was so fun. And I was just peppering him with questions. He's a treasure. And yeah, I'm so glad he was there. And I kind of want to just move to Israel and just like move into his house and hang out with him. That was kind of my. I don't want to do that with everyone that I meet that's a speaker, but this guy was like, man, we could be friends. I'd like for him to adopt me.
You can walk to the place where Abraham lived from his home.
Wow.
You can see it from the end of his street. And if you just kind of, don't need to be on a sidewalk, you can walk across the open field and cross the highway, and you can get there. It's very, very close. Yeah, Avner's a treasure. We've had him on this show multiple times, but he really did us well. And at some point we'll have him back on the show, and you never know, he might make a Redux appearance at one of our conferences.
Absolutely. I'm voting for that.
All right. So one other fun fact here. While RT was preaching on forgiveness, I mean, in the middle of the sermon, just to be clear, and RT does not view himself as what's sometimes called on the circuit as a glory boy, or he believes in signs and wonders. He supports the prophetic. He was, for a period of time, Paul Cain's pastor. He was very close with John Paul Jackson. That's where I first met him. And just to be clear, for those who didn't hear the podcasts we did with him, he held the pulpit, Westminster Chapel in London, that was for years held by Martin Lloyd-Jones. So, I mean, we're talking like reformed word guy, right? But nevertheless, he's open to the things of the Spirit. My friend Bill Robison, if he's listening to this podcast, he's probably standing up cheering right now. Anyway, while RT was preaching, just to emphasize it, this is my house phone right here, and I'm going to move it up to, I hope, where you can see it, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, you can kind of see it.
Yeah, but I want it not to be blurry, and it's blurry.
Put it in front of your face.
Okay, there we go. You see that? I'm putting it against a black background. That feather appeared in my Bible while R.T. Kendall was preaching about forgiveness. That feather right there, my fingers, it's just below my nose. I'm putting the phone below my nose. Look below my nose if you're on YouTube. That feather appeared out of thin air while R.T. Kendall was preaching on forgiveness.
Wow.
Is that crazy?
That's wild. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've said it many times. Forgiveness is a real big deal, y'all.
Yeah. As one friend of mine likes to say, no words.
Right.
I have no words. All right. So what else was memorable to you, Grant?
Well, I had several people that what was funny is I think it was the first day. Did RT speak on the first day? And then Jeremy, yeah. So the first day RT Kendall spoke this word that he's actually been going around speaking. Now he just wrote a book about it, about the Ishmael and Isaac church, and all of that sort of thing. He talked a lot about the versions with the oil, that Jesus, the parable that Jesus gave, and very heavy emphasis on that, and it was amazing. And then later that day, I mean, Jeremy wasn't even in the room; he wasn't, around.
Plane flying to Nashville to speak that night for us.
Yes, and it's the same word that he got.
Yeah.
where and he started hitting it. And so then the next day, that was the first day we really focused on honoring God's word. And I think we said it about every way we could say it by the most heavy hitters that we could find, that it's paramount to honor his word, the authority of the word, infallibility of the word, inerrancy of the word, all of that. We really just hammered it.
Yep.
And so I got a word. I was up the next day, and I didn't get to preach because it was amazing what was happening with the presence that came in the room and all of that sort of thing. And
I just didn't prepare, and you're trying to slide out of it.
I've actually had the message since you asked me. When was that I texted you? I knew exactly what I was supposed to. That was months ago.
It was. I don't remember now. 3, 4 months, 5. I don't know.
So maybe next year. But during that moment, I heard the Lord say, "You've honored my word, and now you're going to get my name." And that's what was happening. The glory was there, and the presence was there. I had several people. I went out Saturday night with a group of young guys from Colorado that first conference they've been to ever of any conference, and so they were just blown away. And they said, you always hear about worshiping in heaven, and like we're just going to worship in heaven. And I've always thought, boy, that sounds boring. And they said, but that moment where we just worshiped for, geez, what was it, an hour? They were like, they never wanted it to stop. And so it was during that time he said, I could finally understand how, like, yes, I never want to move away from that. But during that time, so many people started getting oil on their hands and on their Bibles. And so we were saying, check your hands. And so from that moment on, we had several different moments where the oil of the Lord would show up. One time it hit Sarah's hand so much she thought that she spilled something on him. She couldn't figure it out of what happened as she was getting ready to go play the keys. And so it was just, the presence of the Lord was just, it was misty in there. It literally was a mist. It felt like a fog. And I had rain on my face. And then you got the word, because you didn't know that, you got the word about the rain was coming. And
fire and rain.
Boy, and it happened. It was wild. Just absolutely.
There were quite a few scents of heaven that came. People up in the bleachers were smelling smells. I smelled it down in the front row multiple times. And what was interesting was when how do you describe a smell unless it's like, okay, that's clearly a lemon. So there are a few that we like nail it. But what was interesting was different segments of the room or sections of the room seemed to have different sense of heaven that they were experiencing.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting.
Super interesting. That's what actually popped off the very first part when I knew, we're not leaving this on, what was it, Friday morning, was I smelt this fragrance and I was like, and I just knew in my head, this is the aroma of Christ. And I said, he's in the room. Do you smell it? And so many people were like, I smell it. It's just wild to see. I thought he was going to physically appear at one point. I thought this is it. When we went silent for a while, and the fear of the Lord kind of came, and it's like, he might actually step into this room. And
so I've had meetings where that's occurred. Not too many, but it has happened.
I remember one story I would love for you to share. You shared it with me one time offline, I think, but I look for that every time. I'm like, is this going to be the time? I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing.
Well, I'm trying to think which one I told you.
That you saw the sandal.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was during the Australian outpouring. And 3 friends of mine and I had gone to an area known as the Sunshine Coast. It's a little bit north of Brisbane. And, it's a beachy area. And we'd gone up there for a night just to kind of hang out as friends and maybe sleep in and spend some time swimming in the ocean. And then we were going to come back. And the next night we were going to have a meeting at the one guy's church that he leads. And let me just tell you, this church, they've done some improvements to it since then. But in those years, it was pretty down market. It was a converted warehouse, or what they would say shed, and it had no air conditioning, and had some heating, but not much. So it was bitterly cold in the winter and, blisteringly hot in the summer. We'd been up in the Sunshine Coast, and we had had a visitation of 8 angels, and we all saw all 8 of the angels. It's its own story, and I won't elaborate on it here, although I probably made a bunch of people's heads spin around. But anyway, the shepherds in the field, they saw angels together. So this is not out of bounds. It's just, anyway, there were 8 of them, and we all saw the same thing, and we, fact checked each other afterward. So anyway, we go back to this guy's church, and the church was quite full that night. And so the 4 of us, we're on the front row, and we were just intoxicated with worship. And we were all prostrate on the ground. You got to be careful when you say that word, because you might say prostate. But we were prostrate on the ground, and we're all face down, hands held out like this. For those who can't see because you're not watching YouTube, hands flat with palms on the floor. And anyway, and they had video running, kind of covering the room. And all of a sudden, it looked like a snake line started going through the room, and people just started falling out. And every person who fell out along that snake line was healed. And you can see the snake line on the video. And so it's all kind of going off. And we had a few hundred people in the room. And then, and we kind of heard the, and behind us, but we're all 4 on the ground, face down, just, worshiping God. And then I feel on the backs of my fingers something just very gently and very light, as if, say, somebody took a Kleenex, or maybe something slightly heavier, maybe a washcloth, or the bottom of a shirt tail, and let it drag over your fingers like that. And I felt something like that. And so I looked up to see what it was, and I see, with my naked eye, visible, a pair of sandaled feet with a white robe hanging down, and it was the edge of the robe that was brushing on my fingers. And I went, I'm not looking up, and I put my head back down. So Jesus literally came into that meeting in Australia some years ago now. I think it was 2011 that happened, or maybe 2012. But anyway, so when you say, yeah, I thought the Lord was going to appear, we've had that. I had another meeting in Washington, D.C. one time, where we were trying out words of knowledge with the crowd, and suddenly some smells came into the room. And I'm trying to remember, I think from memory now, I haven't told this story in a while. I think I've got my facts right. The smell that I smelled, I would have said, was sandalwood, which is a kind of a distinct smell. It comes from the, what used to be called the East Indies, the Indonesian islands. But I smelled it really distinctly. And then somebody else smelled something else, and it was citrusy. So it might have been lemon, might have been grapefruit, but anyway. And I couldn't smell that from where I was, and they were only 2 rows away from me. So I just walked forward to the front row and leaned over and sniffed, and I could then smell that. And all of a sudden, this woman in that second row jumps to her feet, and she points beyond me, and she says, I see him. He's and suddenly the room just explodes. And what I remember is that there was a combination of things that happened. There were a bunch of people who just collapsed. And as they did, that, maybe they were trying to grab the chair in front of them or something. And so chairs were kind of, flying or moving around. That church tends to link their chairs together. So some of them only moved, but some of them did actually, break loose or something. There was a woman who had come in. She was the caregiver to an autistic boy. And I remember seeing her standing to my back right, next to one of the stone pillars. And she and the boy just suddenly vanished from view. And I didn't know what happened there. And then there were, I can't remember the number now, but we'd had a word about diabetes, type 1 and type 2. And all these people, like popcorn, they just popped up. And I don't mean they jumped up. It was like they popped up, and most of them fell forward over the seat in front of them and collapsed, kind of slumped over the seat. And when they did that, we didn't know it until later, but we did get confirmation. Every single one of those people were healed of their type 1 and type 2 diabetes in that very moment. And I don't remember now the exact number, but I want to say it was in the mid 30s of people. And then presently, after that happened, I see that woman who's the caregiver to the autistic child kind of crawling her way up the wall, because it's a brick structure. So she kind of using her fingers and the kind of handhold you can get with the grout line. And she's crawling her way up the wall, and she turns around and she looks at me and she points at the kid, and she does like that. And he'd been healed of autism like that.
Oh,
So sometimes Jesus walks in the room, and when he does, all heaven breaks loose. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, man. I just want to kind of stop here for a minute and just if you hear these kinds of stories, these testimonies, they open something up in your faith that you can begin to believe for those things for yourself. And um and I've seen it over and over again. And so I just wanted to just encourage everyone that's listening to expect to see him now. I mean, you've heard stories, you've heard of it, and again, we're talking about that hunger and that expectation, right? And so there's every time I go into a worship setting, I am expecting. I'm saying, is this the day that he shows up? Is this the day that I get to see his sandal? Um, and I didn't have that frame of reference until I heard that story from Ken. And so it's one of the beautiful things about this podcast and hanging out in this sort of scenarios, that we get to hear the stories that you probably don't get to hear if you just go to a meeting where Ken's talking about the biblical framework of blah blah blah, whatever. Because he doesn't get to share it. Where we get to hear these is when we're hanging out afterwards at dinner, and I'm just peppering Ken with questions. And it's why I started this podcast, was to just say, I want to just talk to you and hear all the stories. And I also want to plug shamelessly, but I can do it without shame because it's not mine. Ken's book, On the Road with the Holy Spirit, is just, it's like that. It's like being able to go to lunch with Ken for 5 hours, and he's just telling you these most amazing, unbelievable testimonies. I bought 2 cases for the church that I'm giving away, because it's incredible. It's a faith builder. And so I read it for my devotion, along with the scriptures. But then there's also like incredible teaching that I didn't even know. It's like bonus teaching where he begins to explain a little bit of what he's talking about and all of that sort of thing. So I just wanted to just point that out. Next time you're in a room, expect Jesus to show up. And one day, I mean, we all know he's going to show up one day, but but you never know which time he might grace us with his presence. You know, it's a
I think that's a really important point you're making, Grant, not about my book, but about Jesus showing up, because I mean, I appreciate the book, but, and yeah, you should all buy it. But the main thing is, after the resurrection, Jesus was around. And it's not just like on resurrection day, because Paul talks about him appearing to 500 at once. He doesn't say where or when it happened, but it did. And we see at moments in the book of Acts, I'm particularly thinking of the story when Paul gets to Corinth from Athens, and he's worried that he's going to be assailed by the crowds, as had happened to him in Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea. And he's praying one night, and it says Jesus stood by his bed and said, Paul, you do not need to be afraid to go on speaking here, for I have many people in this city. And so I think that there is a dynamic that we have completely missed in the modern church. And I mean, I think that Catholics and Orthodox maybe do a little better than your mainline Protestants, but I'd say by and large, all of us are deficient in this. And I just wonder if the Lord has not been appearing as he did in the book of Acts, because of our unbelief and because of our lack of hunger, expectation, and faith. Hef. I just wonder about that, because I know people who have seen him, and I've talked with them about that. I know people who see angels. I would say maybe not every day, although some seem to, but I'd say at least now and then, or routinely, whatever way you want to characterize that. there are so many of these things that are part of the normal existence in the New Testament and the Old. We were talking about ignition, building a sustainable move of God. And it seems to me that part of what seems to spike these events in the Bible itself are these various forms of encounter. The word of the Lord came to Elijah, go show yourself now to Ahab and gather the prophets of Baal. And then he calls down fire from heaven. Well, that was based on an encounter. Then he has a recommissioning at Mount Horeb. Moses with the burning bush. We could just go on, and I've already named a few things out of the New Testament. So when we think about these things, it seems as though these theophanies, these appearances of God himself, in whichever form he chooses to do it, or his angelic messengers, or I never ever talk about this stuff, but
Come on.
one
It's
time,
just me and you here, Ken.
yeah,
It's just
you
us.
and thousands of our best friends. But one time I was in prayer and I saw one of the four living creatures from heaven, and it came and approached me. And we've got the 24 elders around the throne. I have a friend, and they had an encounter. They couldn't quite define it, and the more we debriefed on it, I said, I am certain that was one of the 24 elders sent to you. So there are these things which they're not part of our normal, and they need to be part of our normal. Now, we can't make it up. I want to really emphasize that. We cannot make this up. We're not going to fake it. We're not going to, bluff our way through it. We're not going to pretend that we had something happen when nothing happened. But on the other hand, what if God is hungry for us to have those encounters? And because of our low hunger and expectation, and consequently faith, maybe there are things all around us that, like the great cloud of witnesses, that we aren't somehow experiencing that. Because at Ignition this week, well, it wasn't even a full week, it was 3 days. At Ignition, we had oil, we had feathers, and we had heavenly sense. And like you said, you were expecting to see Jesus walk into the room. And I mean, he's done it in meetings that I've led. So it's not like it would be unheard of. It's in the Bible. We're not crazy to say this. It's just not our normal. And I don't think it'll ever be anybody's normal. But on the other hand, why shouldn't we all be able to say that over the course of a lifetime, we've seen him in, I don't know, half a dozen times or something?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a couple weeks ago, I heard the Lord say that he was grieved, and I'm self-centered. So I thought I did something, I thought he was mad at me. But he said he was grieved, and I heard him say that he's grieved because his bride is not ready for his return. And he longs to return. He longs to be united with his bride. And he just sort of, like, I don't know how to even explain it, but imparted just for a moment the feeling of longing that he has to be with us, and I don't think we understand the Maranatha cry. I don't think we really understand that well, as a whole. I know I don't, but he's so, I can't overstate how much he longs to be with us, and it's his mercy that's withholding that, right? It's his mercy that's holding back the hour, so that it's not his will that any should perish.
Yeah.
And but there is this longing that the Lord has to be with us, and so I think if we can get that hunger and expectation, who knows what could happen. And so if you're not hungry, get hungry. Ask the Lord to make you hungry. And
expectation is the combustible fuel of faith.
Yep.
So again, I think the tiering is hunger, expectation, faith, but Jeremy said it is expectation, hunger, faith. I don't know. Maybe we'll figure it out one of these days. But anyway, you need all three. How about that?
Yeah. Perfect.
Well, I'm trying to think of what else we want to cover. I want to revisit this thing of the oil and the virgins having, oil for their lamps and waiting for the bridegroom. And then, the shout comes, the bridegroom cometh. I thought it was just fascinating. I mean, truly fascinating. I mean, I was like, wait a minute, that RT had preached on this and obviously did it very, very well. And then Jeremy was on an airplane and had no knowledge of that. And he walks into the meeting shortly before he was to speak. So I don't know, somebody would say, well, someone told Jeremy. I doubt it. I guess it's possible, but I doubt it.
No, I mean, I was there when he got there.
Ask him and
Yeah.
say, "Hey, did anyone tell you that RT had preached on, the parable of the virgins, out of Matthew?" Probably the answer is going to be no. But the point is, if the Lord brings the same passage of scripture by two different preachers on the same day, he's clearly trying to underscore something and say, hey, you down there. Hey, yeah, you, I'm talking to you. Church, are you paying attention? Can you hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches? I really think there's something of that going on.
Yeah.
It might even be worthwhile to say, I don't know, take a week and just read through that parable every day for a week and see what you learn from that specific parable.
That's great. That's a great idea.
Yeah, you might be surprised.
Oh. Man, I'm stirred up right now.
Yeah.
Let's go. I'll tell you, the most amazing thing, in my opinion, happened for me Sunday morning when Melissa had the vision at our church of the kid angels kind of fighting and playing, and then Sarah said, "Let's get all the kids out here and pray for them," and the kids got wrecked and started deep travail and shaking, and the Holy Spirit came on them, and they were wrecked. And it's my church. I know all the kids, and so one of the kids said later to their parent, I heard later that day, she said, I don't think I'll ever be the same. And she was 8, 9. I mean, it's just it's incredible.
And let's dismiss this. Remember that Josiah, the great king, reformer king, whichever way you want to say it, he was 8 years old when he became king. I think sometimes we think that the children need to be kind of, pushed to the side so we can get on to the more important big adult stuff. But there are these various accounts, and we have them from France, we have them from China, we have them from Korea, of children's revivals where the children were prophesying, the children were baptized in the Holy Spirit. And, the adults were pretty much undone by watching the children in that way. And there have been things like this that have gone on in the U.S., but they tend not to be put on front and center. And this happened front and center at your church. And yeah, these kids were all just completely blown up. And it was kids don't fake. That's, I think, the thing every listener needs to understand. If there's something happening and they fall down, it's because they're falling down under the power. They're not just going to do this to do it.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, it ain't like they've seen it much either. It's not like they're, a lot of them have never really even been around that kind of thing, because maybe they've been sequestered in children's church or whatever during meetings. So it's not like, I mean, growing up, I used to see it all the time. As a kid, I'd sit in the Sunday night service that went for 5 hours, and during the revival renewal thing, and watch everybody fall all the time, But it was certainly authentic. It was amazing, and it really started beginning to spread to the adults. That was one of the catalytic things that broke it open in the room on that time. But just a holdover and a continuation, and maybe that's a sign that we're in a sustainable move of God. It kept going, right? I mean, maybe it really is. We talked about it. We taught on it. We expected it, and then we're continuing to see it. So I think we're going to continue to hear stories from folks.
One of the words that one of the speakers used, I don't remember who it was. Maybe you do, but one of the speakers used the term intergenerational when describing a sustainable move of God. So it would be very apropos, which is the French way of saying it, apropos, for this to be spilling over to the children and see that kind of breakout. And I'm thinking about next year. Again, it's only been one day, so just understand I'm thinking out loud. But I'm thinking about maybe next year we have a session for the children and we have them pray for the adults at whatever we call the conference next year.
We have much to discuss on all this, Ken, but yeah, I think we should do a lot with the kids. We'll see if I can pull something off.
Right. Well, anyway, I don't know what more to say right now. We're right up on an hour here, so
I think we did it. Yeah, I think we did it. Come
go ahead.
out.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's enough of a debrief, unless you're thinking of anything I'm not thinking of.
So many things, so many stories, and I think one of the things that we talked about, and I think next week we'll highlight it, is that the theme that I kept hearing about was the worship and how incredible it was for that. And so, if I can finagle it, it's a big ask, but maybe I can get the worship leaders on our here next week. One of them is my wife, so I think I can. My wife, by the way, not my daughter. Everyone thought that my wife was my daughter at the conference, and I have questions now about choices I've made in my life. But she might too. She might as well. But anyway, so we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that and the dynamics. It was an incredible worship time as well. So otherwise, Ken, I think let's go get some sleep and prepare. If it's sustainable, part of it is we actually need rest, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It is really true. Even God rested on the seventh day.
That's right.
So, all right. Well, so again, the conference next year, whatever we end up calling it, will be October 8 to 11 at Bethel World Outreach in Franklin, Tennessee. And you'll have plenty of notice before we open the registration for next year. But we encourage you, whether you're there in person or by video, we encourage you to be there. And if at all possible, be there in the room, because there is something special that went on this year and last year for those who were able to attend in person.
Yeah, that's great. Ken, I just want to thank you. I heard from so many folks that they've never seen a conference like this. They've never seen something that's robust. And I had people that have sworn off conferences that came. I said, please come. And they haven't gone to a conference in 15 years. And they said, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And so I know we're getting to glimpse into a little bit of your mind as you're piecing this together and calling these scholars and wild prophets and all of these sort of things together. And so I just want to thank you for what you're doing and what you're continuing to do. And I think we can all get behind that. And we need, like they say, more cowbell. We need more Ken Fish. And so, we've got a fever, and the only cure is Ken Fish, right?
No, the only cure is more Jesus. Let's keep the main thing the main thing.
There you go. Well, Ken, thank you for joining us on the day after, essentially, that you're back, and we look forward to many more podcasts, and we look forward to seeing you all again next year, October 8th through the 11th, for whatever conference, whatever the name it's going to be called, at Bethel World Outreach in the Nashville, Tennessee area. Otherwise, we will call this good, and we'll be back here same time, same channel next week for another episode of God is Not a Theory with Ken Fish.
If you're interested in exploring courses with Ken through Orbis School of Ministry, click on the link in the description of this podcast or go to orbissm.com. You can also send any school-related inquiries to our registrar, Joe McKay, at jo@orbisministries.org.